Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live, talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynn@pghcitypaper.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
Hey there, and welcome to the program. Boy, do I have a treat for you today. Murder! Which is much better than treason, which is what we've been talking about for the last God knows how long now. Joining me today is author, journalist Paula Reed Ward, who labors most days for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and somehow doing that, being a mother of two young boys and all of this, she managed to knock a book out called Death by Cyanide. And if you are a true crime lover, this be the book you should get, okay? Page Turner, Death by Cyanide. Is this your first book?
It is, and possibly the last. We'll see how it goes.
Was it a real struggle?
The writing was wonderful. It flowed right out like there was nobody's business. The reporting is emotionally draining and exhausting, and so if you ask my husband, it was a long year.
Well, yeah, he'd be the one who knew.
Right.
So, I just want to let my audience know that the phones are we're not taking calls for at least whatever. I want to get sort of the basics in here, and then we'll open up phone lines if you have some questions. And I don't have my phone. Let me see. My phone number is, I never know my own phone, 412, I got that far, 200 5686. I swear that is what I was going to say. 200 5686. It's pathetic. But don't call at the moment. So Paula Reed Ward, as a reporter, covered this big murder case here.
It's my beat. Yeah.
Murder
Yeah.
is your beat.
Well, my beat is the court system, the state court system. Murder takes up a lot of time.
Wow.
Yeah.
What does that do to you?
It makes you sad sometimes and a little bit more paranoid than maybe other people would be, but more appreciative for the really great things in your life.
Uh-huh. Okay.
So that's that.
But fascinating that you see, I don't know. You see, I mean, well, we'll talk about it specifically with Death by Cyanide. This is a case. Did it garner much attention beyond Pittsburgh?
It did. There were, Dateline came in and did an episode about it, and 48 Hours was interested in doing one, and then the family chose to do Dateline instead. So there was a little bit of national attention early on. The Wires picked up the trial coverage and the verdict. Nobody really was here from anywhere else.
Okay. But the Dateline, that already aired?
It did. It aired in April of 15, I think it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you think they did? I mean, I'm curious because you know this case inside, outside. So and Dateline, if you've ever watched, I mean, has a certain feel to it.
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
Don't they always say don't watch alone?
Yeah. They had a lot of really good detail from the family and stuff like that. They did a good job in gathering the information.
Oh, she's so diplomatic.
I tried. They did a good job. I feel like it ended a little bit abruptly, almost as if they wanted more time. Maybe they needed another hour to tell it or something like that. But it seemed like it ended abruptly to me.
Well, the case, and we haven't really even, I'm just assuming that most of you know the case, but now I have to remember that some of you don't live in Pittsburgh. So this is a case that is one of those things where, we all walk around with ideas of who a murderer is and who a potential murder victim is and all of this. And these two didn't fit the stereotype.
Not at all. That's why what drew me to writing the book, because they were completely different from every other case that I had covered.
These were highly educated people.
Yep.
Respected people.
Yes.
Scientists. No criminal records. No, I mean, and so it's mind-blowing.
Yeah. It was the idea that these two people who were at the tops of their career seemingly had everything going for them. They had a beautiful house, a lovely young daughter. They had everything in the world going for them.
So this is the murder case of Autumn Klein, the deceased, and her husband, Dr. Robert Ferrante.
Yes.
A handsome guy.
He was 23 years older than her.
23 years older, handsome. They met when she was working in his laboratory, right, as a
PhD student.
As a PhD student, okay. 23 years, and you say that because you think that that's important, that he was 23 years older in terms of potentially what went wrong.
I think that it's important for perspective about how a marriage might run into trouble as one person is only 41 and the other one is 65.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you're at different life points, and perhaps, I imagine we'll talk about this, but they were having trouble in their relationship, and she had planned to leave him. And I think that might help explain some of that marital strife.
Yeah, that would.
Right.
Now, I found that this is a guy who'd been married before.
Yes.
Married young in his early 20s, had 2 children, but his wife was a little, apparently, bipolar?
I believe they said schizophrenic.
Okay, she had some mental difficulties, and that marriage broke up.
Right.
And amazingly, again, not really, but amazingly, he ends up raising their children, even though the court gave them dual custody.
They had agreed to dual custody. But then what happened was she seemed to just kind of fade out of the picture, and she wasn't around very much. And so it ended up that Dr. Ferrante raised the kids with his father. His father ended up moving into the home with them. And so they did it together.
Now, I find that very curious and very sort of, it warms my heart.
Right.
Here we have something very unusual. 2 men, a man and his father, raising young children.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. It was
so that speaks, I mean, right away you think, gosh, that's so cool. And then in your book it becomes clear he was a very much, a father, good father.
He was a very good father. From all accounts, he was a wonderful father. He was very much involved. He coached their sporting teams. He took them horseback riding. He took his daughter to horseback riding lessons.
Yeah.
And he was very much a good dad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not a murderer. I mean, this is so not a murderer. All right. He raises these 2 kids. Off they go. Then he ends up remarrying this driven, bright, anorexic, woman.
Right.
Who worked under him.
I don't know if she was anorexic all the time.
Okay, all right.
There was a bit in college.
Oh, you're such a reporter. I mean, you deal in facts.
I
And
do.
that, yeah.
I do.
Well, look at
One
her.
of my
She was
friends
so
told me. One of my friends told me if you would make some of this up, the book would be a bestseller.
Be a little fast and loose. So they get married. Well, here, in regard to him, I'm more he's the fascinating character.
Right.
She's just dead.
Oh.
No, but isn't that awful? But that is what happens.
It is. It is.
The story is the story of this wonderful, handsome, brilliant father becoming a cold-blooded murderer. That, to me, is the...
Right.
She, unfortunately, she's gone.
Right.
Unbelievable. I came upon this, and this is the first foreshadowing in your book that I'm aware of. And it comes on page 25, so we're barely in. And you say about the divorce, his first divorce. Bob blamed the divorce on his wife's illness, but she told a reporter decades later, quote, "He wanted me barefoot, pregnant, and in the kitchen. and then went on to say he wouldn't let her have a Tupperware party because he didn't, quote, want strangers in the house. All of a sudden, I read that and I think, uh-oh, that's red flag stuff, red flag stuff. Controller.
Yeah.
Total controller.
It seems so.
Okay, so the first little chink in the armor of this wondrous being. So how do they end up in Pittsburgh? I mean, they're going, their careers are going sky high in Boston.
Right. So what happened was, and there was actually kind of a difference of opinion in the trial about this. Some people said that they came to Pittsburgh for Autumn's job. Some people said that they came for Bob's job.
They both were offered employment.
I think that this story is that they both were offered very good jobs here in Pittsburgh. In Boston, the Brigham and Women Harvard medical system is really, really competitive. And so Autumn was having to work ridiculously long hours. They pay you less well there because it's such a competitive place.
People
So
would kill to have that on their resume. Hey,
And
man, I was at
Right. And
Brigham
so
Women's.
what happened was they were both offered jobs here in Pittsburgh. They were both very good jobs. Autumn was going to come here and start a women's neurology program at UPMC. And be a leader in her field here in Pittsburgh. She was going to make good money in a town with a way lower cost of living. You know, she was able to work a quarter of a mile from her home,
where she
instead of
had
having
a
to-
long commute.
Right. So
Yeah.
so it really worked out for both of them. And then Bob was coming to set up his lab here. He's a neuro researcher. He was studying Huntington's and ALS, and he'd moved his lab here to Pitt.
So, for him, it sounds lateral.
I think that's probably
Yeah.
true. Sure.
Lateral. He just keeps doing what he was doing, but
Right.
it's a valuable thing he's doing. And then she has more of a potential trajectory right up sky high.
And that point too, you know, Autumn was only 41. She was very early in her career, whereas Bob was starting to contemplate retirement.
Okay.
Yeah.
We should add that they had a daughter,
Yes.
a young daughter, who at the time of the murder was how old?
6.
6 years old. Okay.
She just turned 10 now in January.
Poor kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's doing very well.
She's with her parents. Autumn's
yes, she's with
parents.
Autumn's parents. Yeah.
Okay. So, you start the book right at the April 17th, 2013. Autumn Klein worked a 15-hour day.
Yes, she did.
Like you were talking about in Boston, she had to work all these long hours again. Well, she came here and was doing the same thing.
She was.
And this is a woman with a young child at home. She worked a 15-hour day. She walked home. This, again, the quality of life for them improving so much. They lived in Oakland. She just walked out the door, walked home, walked into her kitchen. He came down or was already there. This was something.
Depending
in
on the story, that's right.
The testimony already is then, was he not? But suffice to say that in a matter of moments, she was lying on the kitchen floor, gasping for air,
Yes.
breath, and she was dying.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
The 911 call was brutal
you had to sit and listen to it.
several times. It was
brutal because you could hear her in the background.
yes. You could hear her gasping for breath.
And his voice, calm or no, hysterical, sort of.
Hysterical. His voice in the 911 call was really high pitched, panicked, pleading.
Help me, help
Right.
us.
And then by the time the trial came and he ended up testifying, his voice was completely different. And anybody who had listened to the 911 calls like, who's up that? Who is that?
It was like totally like 2 octaves lower.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So do you think he had a good defense? I mean, his defense, his attorneys, do you think they put forward the best defense you could put? And is it conceivable that he could have walked?
His defense attorneys were very good. And I think that the problem that they faced was that even with all of the experts that they retained, the idea of the defense was to say, well, we don't think she died from cyanide poisoning.
But how could they say that?
Well, the problem was that their experts could say, we're not sure it was cyanide poisoning. Some of her symptoms didn't match cyanide poisoning. If it was cyanide, she shouldn't have been able to hang on for so long. She didn't die till 3 days later, although she was on life
She was
support.
as good as dead. Yeah.
But
yeah.
none of their experts could say, no, it was an electrical brain surge, or no, it was an aortic dissection. There was no other good, reliable explanation. And so I think they were kind of stuck with that.
And one of the people, though, casting doubt on whether or not it was cyanide poisoning was our very own, you can't have a trial without him, Cyril Wecht,
It's true.
testifying for the defense.
Yes. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. You asked before if I thought that he could have not been convicted. And I think that the Google searches that the prosecution found, in which he was Googling potassium cyanide and toxicity, cyanide toxicity, and that type of thing, I think those were very, very damning in the case.
Okay, so don't people know now? So here's this guy. He's smart as hell, right?
Yeah.
He is smart as hell.
He is.
And he is sort of cold, cool, and very organized kind of a guy. So he's been convicted of first-degree murder. Is that not correct?
He is.
Okay.
He's in prison.
So first-degree murder means you thought about it, you plotted it, you did it. If he's so brilliant, what's he Googling on his laptop? How do you kill your wife with cyanide? I mean, not quite, but I mean, sort of that kind of thing.
Right.
What?
I think that if he did it, because I don't take sides. So go in knowing that I'm not going to take sides.
Okay. If he did it.
If he did it, I would speculate that he expected that no one was going to know that she died from cyanide, because cyanide is not a typical test that the ME's office runs anymore. Okay.
Medical examiner.
Yep, sorry, the medical examiner's office. They don't run cyanide as a standard test
because
anymore.
it is a very unusual
rare. Right.
way of killing
If there's a
somebody.
person who died in a fire or a chemical accident or something, sure, but they wouldn't run it on a
Why-
typical person.
Why? When we all know cyanide is a poison that kills you dead, why don't people use it?
Well, I think it's hard to get.
There you go.
Yes. So I think that if he did it, he would have never suspected that anyone would know that it was cyanide. He probably, I think that, and again, I hate kind of speculating in this public sort of way, but I think that he probably would have assumed that it was a medical mystery. They weren't going to figure it out. He even at the hospital, while she was still being cared for, asked that they don't do an autopsy. He requested that an autopsy not be done. And so it was clear that he didn't know that in Pennsylvania, if you die from, you have to have one.
He didn't know.
He
So
didn't know.
there was a Google search he should have done. He's thinking they won't do an autopsy.
Right.
They won't understand what the hell happened. I'm going to be able to do this, get her cremated, everything, and gone.
Right.
No problem here.
Right.
But if a death is suspicious in any way, or
If there's not a medical cause that's identifiable by the hospital.
then in Pennsylvania, you got to do an autopsy.
Right.
So he went wrong there. He also went wrong with, ordering the cyanide in a very kind of, a lot of people knew.
Yes. It was
I remember reading your stories as this thing unfolded. And when I read, what? He ordered cyanide?
Right. There were 3 bottles in the lab already.
And there were already bottles in the lab?
Right.
Well, he ain't so smart. I'm sorry. I don't get it. I'm surprised he didn't pull this off. He thought he was going to.
I think so. Yeah.
So, what's bizarre is Her body goes to the coroner's office here, the medical examiner's office. The autopsy is done. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, back up in Oakland, we don't have to get into all the blah, 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 but all of a sudden somebody in Oakland at the hospital says, wait a minute, we got this high cyanide reading report from Quest.
That's right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Does the medical examiner know this, right? Or something, and they
Right.
call the coroner, the medical examiner, and say, hey, we got this thing, and blah, 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 blah. Oops.
Right, the body's gone.
We already sent the body to McCabe. Call McCabe. We already stuck it in the incinerator. Gone. I'm
Right.
sorry.
That's okay.
Okay.
It's true. Right.
Ferranti, the killer, had to have breathed a big, big sigh of relief. Yeah?
Probably.
Oh,
if he
God!
did it.
This is a real reporter. I could no more do what you do. This is a journalist in this age of where people don't know what news is. This is the real deal. Okay.
Thanks.
Even after the fact, after he's been convicted, after you wrote the book, and if do you think people reading this book that some people will have a, as they say, shadow of a doubt?
So I actually take great pride in, I bet you half of the people that I hear from who have read the book aren't sure he did it. And in fact, my publisher, my editor with the publisher, when he finished reading my manuscript, said, I'm not convinced. And I'm like, okay. But then other people are really convinced.
Well,
and so in my world, that means that I've done a good job.
You did a hell of a job, because when I was reading this book, a friend was also reading it. We were sort of she absolutely took his side.
See?
And I thought, are you out of your mind? I mean, I remember sitting in my home here reading your articles before he even went to trial.
Right.
I had him hung.
Right.
So, admittedly, I'm not capable of this sort of neutral, blank slate perspective that
Right.
you bring.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
So a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
would, if they were on the jury, they would have had a reasonable doubt. He would have walked.
Well, reasonable doubt is this kind of amorphous thing. And the way that the courts describe it to you is a doubt that would cause you to hesitate or pause in a matter of importance in your daily life. And quite frankly, I don't know how there's not reasonable doubt in almost every case. If there's not video evidence and a confession, I don't know how there's not some reasonable doubt. And in this case, one of the things that I think is really significant, and we touched on it earlier, is
Quest.
He's a good man. And it's hard to wrap your mind around a man who can raise his 2 children by himself, be working to cure a horrific disease that affects so many people.
But if you encountered him in a normal setting, talking to him, I know, on paper, good man. My guess is if I spent 20 minutes with this guy at a cocktail party, I would start looking for somebody else to talk to. He sounds like a classic, excuse me, asshole. Who said the kind. You talk about mansplaining. This is like a mansplainer. Yeah, this is a guy who's never wrong. This is a guy who's probably condescending. This is a guy who's not good at telling a joke. This is a guy, I would have, my guess is, even though I would have been drawn to his handsomeness, and if I heard he'd raised his son and daughter he's a jerk. But this is interesting. So people read this book. You read it. You tell me.
You should totally read it.
Death by Cyanide. This is everywhere.
It is. I don't know about everywhere, but it's
Yeah.
in bookstores.
Totally
Amazon.
available.
Yes.
Okay. I'm just going to start jumping around in here. There's a guy in her life, a friend. I got a lot of man friends. Named Thomas McElrath.
Mm-hmm.
He's a doctor, too.
Yep.
Lives in California or
Boston.
somewhere on the West Coast. Oh, Boston.
Boston. They met in California. They were going to California for a conference.
Okay. Is he the guy that you think Ferranti thought, this is the guy who made Ferranti jealous enough to kill her? I mean,
he's
if we're
the
looking
guy.
for motive,
He's the guy that they believed Ferranti thought. This is a lot of things that I'm just. Ferranti believed that she was having an affair, and Dr. McElrath is the person that he thought that was true.
Well,
it was not true.
Not,
she was not.
He was a friend.
Right. They had a friendship. They were close friends.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if there's a motive, it seems to me there's two possible motives that this wonderful man would all of a sudden become a murderer. And that is jealousy, thinking his wife was sleeping with somebody else. And as you said, the marriage was getting a little shaky.
Right.
And two, it would have been like professional jealousy, that as you've noted, his career, he was thinking his career's like this and hers is like that.
Right.
Other than that, there's no other, I mean, those are the two things,
well,
right?
The other stressor that was going on in the marriage at the time was that she had been trying to get pregnant and she was having infertility issues. And so that had caused a lot of trouble with the marriage. Autumn very much did not want her daughter to be an only child. Autumn had been an only child to parents who were a little bit older when they had her. And Autumn did not want that for Cyanide. She knew that, obviously Dr. Ferranti was older, and if anything were to happen to her, she didn't want Cyanide to be on her own.
Oh, God.
And so
Jeez.
She had been trying very hard to get pregnant and had gone through several rounds of IVF unsuccessfully.
Yeah.
And a lot of the evidence at trial included emails and text messages between Bob and Autumn about her frustration with him, that he wasn't helping, that he wasn't present in her, daily having to do the injections, and he didn't care as much about the process.
Well, he
as
was
she thought
65 or something.
Right.
He had 2 grown children.
Right.
He already had.
And he told her at one point during the relationship that if she did get pregnant, that kid would be hers. I mean, he used that phrase.
Okay. But she really seemed to be mentally messed up about this. I mean, really. I mean, she's so. I don't think. She is not a warm and cuddly person either, to me. I don't. You're not sure.
I don't know if I'd call her warm and cuddly, but she was. I don't know if warm and cuddly is the right word, but she was completely non-judgmental and open-minded and very loving to her patients. So I don't know if I'd say warm and cuddly exactly.
Okay.
But I think she was a really good person.
Okay. So you think they were both really good people?
Well,
one's dead and the other's in stir.
No, what I
Right.
said was, I find it difficult to parse how this guy who appeared to be a good man and a good father could have done this. Obviously, I wasn't there for anything.
But that goes back to how I started the conversation with, we walk around with these ideas in our head about what a murderer is.
Sure.
What
Of
they
course.
look like, what they do for a living.
Of
blah, blah.
course.
And this is a prejudice we have, that this handsome, well-educated, man of great respect and professionally and blah, 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 would be a murderer.
Right.
Who raised his children.
Well, I mean, when you think of your typical murderer, you don't think of that person.
And you, who are on the murder beat, that's true? So, I mean, the stereotype of what a murderer is comes from someplace, you're saying. Yeah.
Well, it does. I mean, I can tell you that in 20 years of being a reporter, I have only covered one homicide where the killer had a PhD and raised his kids, and
You could
Right?
relate more to that guy.
I could, and that's why I ended up writing the book. I felt a connection to Autumn. You know, she was only 41. She was trying to balance work and
motherhood,
her kid.
and
and so she liked to run and she baked and all these things that I share with her, right? That I have in common with her in some way. And so I felt a connection to her. And then when you take this other side of it of, you know, they're really highly educated, they have these great jobs, they're trying to make a difference in the world. I find the psychology behind it absolutely fascinating. And, you know, early on I heard a little bit of criticism. Oh, sure, you want to write a book about the rich white people. And that had nothing to do with any of it. I wanted to write a book about the highly educated people whose lives were out there for the taking.
But why imagine that just because somebody's highly educated, there's not a screw loose somewhere.
I mean, I think everybody probably has a little screw loose.
Oh, I got more than I got screws all over. I actually do have screws inside me. I got some in my foot that are now loose. They've broken in half.
No.
Yeah.
Oh.
Screws loose.
Oh, that's kind of funny, though.
It is. Well, I don't know. So you got all that going. I want to get to the guys that like really. I want to get to the people who put him away.
Okay.
I want to go to the cops, and I want to go to the DA Pellegrini.
Okay.
Okay. Great characters.
Yeah.
I mean, they're like classic. We're
They
talking
are.
about stereotypes.
Yeah.
Just classic
They are.
characters.
They are.
So, I'm Jim McGee and Robert
Provident.
Provident.
Mm-hmm.
From day one that they learn about there's a dead woman,
Right.
blah, blah, blah. Instinctively, they figured it was the husband, right?
I think that's where they go every time, yeah. It's
Well,
always
they
the
go
spouse.
every time because what?
It's always the spouse.
It is.
Right.
So they approach the handsome, wonderful PhD, successful, great father guy, and they're thinking, you killed this wife. And they turn out to be, according to the jury, right.
Yeah.
I was fascinated by how they went about their work. You know, you see a cop or a detective, they really have to immerse themselves in things that they might not know anything about, as do you covering it. So all of a sudden, you've got to understand toxicology.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to understand, how what cyanide does and how an operation, I'm thinking of Pellegrini here too, like Quest, when the sample comes in, what really goes on here, there. You've got to know all of that stuff. You got to know medical stuff.
Mm-hmm. That's why my job is so awesome. Because I have to learn new stuff every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you got to the point where you really understood. Like I'm thinking, those jurors sitting through, how long was the trial?
10 days.
10 days.
I think.
Those jurors, poor souls, sitting there. And some days it was, can you imagine Cyril Wecht? It was Cyril Wecht, the verbosity, and then talking about stuff that as a juror, as a person, you, me, we know nothing. And it got very technical.
It did.
Do you think jurors they don't check jurors for their IQ. There's got to be times when jurors are like, or even blanking out. I mean, and then they've got this person's. That's what I was thinking. I would have struggled to follow a lot of the testimony.
I think maybe to some degree, but the good thing in this case, and it doesn't happen in every jury, but this jury was really good. They were very highly educated. There were lots of master's and advanced degrees on it, which is unusual.
Really?
Yeah. For as many as there were, it's not unusual, but there were, I think, 8. It's in the book. There were several, though, that had at least bachelor's degree. Several had master's degrees. And the other part of it is, too, though, there's a lot of repetition. They go over the stuff about the blood tests and the Quest results. I mean, they talk about them over and over again. And so eventually
you
you're
get a
going to get
sense.
it because
Okay.
you keep getting pounded over the head with it.
We got a question coming in on email. Lynn, this is fascinating. I would like to know if And the phones are open. I would like to know if the fertility drugs had an impact on her personality. This can be pretty difficult to deal with. Did the husband think he was dealing with an unstable wife again? Oh.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I did not hear anything in my reporting that was the case, that she was having any emotional
Because
or
those-
personality changes.
Well, we do want to say that if you get these treatments, they are zapping hormones into you
Right.
at a level, you think PMS is bad? I mean, people can go stark raving nuts when
Sure.
they're getting these treatments.
I do know that she was having emotional difficulty, and I'm not going to blame that on the fertility drugs. I think that might be more of a combination of you desperately want to get pregnant, you're already 41. There's a lot of, I can envision a scenario where you're completely obsessed with that as a woman. I totally can get that.
Sure.
And I didn't have that struggle, but in my brain, if I did, I can't even imagine what I would be like to be around. So I know that. I do also know, though, that in the few months before she died, she was having a lot of trouble. She was having, her hair was thinning, her complexion was terrible. People were asking her constantly, "Are you okay? Do you feel okay?" And that was in the months leading up to her death. So
Does anybody know what that was all about? Where was that coming from? That would seem to help the defense. Maybe she was ill.
the book references in the original criminal complaint, the one of Dr. Ferrante's assistants in the lab asked the detectives if they had checked Autumn for a chemical called 3NP, which is nitropropionic acid, and it is a neurotoxin that is used in research. It helps mimic effects of Huntington's disease in mice. And the detectives are like, "What do you mean? We don't know what 3NP is." And he said, "Well, doctor," and this is all in the criminal complaint, so I'm not telling you anything that's not publicly available. And the assistant said, "Dr. Ferrante had asked me to borrow or to order 3NP 3 times in the last few months because he said that the lab next door had been borrowing ours." And the detectives went to the lab next door and asked, and that was not the case. And so put all those pieces together.
Right.
And the detectives and the district attorney's office attempted to find a test that they could run on the blood samples and tissue and things that they had from Autumn afterward to see if they could test for the 3NP in her system.
Right.
And there was no such test that exists because nobody poisons each other with 3NP. And so because they had the positive cyanide result, they just pursued the test that they knew for sure that they had the results they needed.
Okay, you said in the course of all that, you used the phrase putting the pieces together. I was blown away that people over there on wherever, Grant Street or wherever, around those parts, were sitting in a room with shredded you know what it looks like? You shred paper? Pile of shredded paper. And their job was to piece it back together. The ultimate jigsaw puzzle. And reminded me of this. What was the movie where they rescued the hostages in Iran with was that called Argo? It was. In Argo, as they're just about to get on the plane and make their way out of Iran, there are some guys working for the bad, Revolutionary Guard. And they're doing exactly that, because finding stuff that was in the U.S. Embassy that had been shredded and putting it together.
Right.
And that's really, I remember thinking, you're kidding. You mean people really, oh my God. So they did it, and they did put it together. And they found that the genius, handsome genius, had written essentially suicide notes, his own suicide notes.
They called them goodbye letters.
Well, yeah. I'm sorry I'm not here with you.
Listen.
I'm going to see Autumn. I'm going to be with Autumn.
They didn't say that.
I think the last one did say, I'll be with Autumn. I'm sorry I won't be with your I won't live to see to his children.
Right.
And what were those goodbye? Where was he going? And then he shreds them all.
Right. Well, right. You're just trying. You're trying so hard to pin me down. You're just trying.
My God. So here's a jerk who was able to kill his wife, and then what? Thought he was going to kill himself? What was that about? You don't know.
I don't
You suspect.
I could speculate when we are not on air. That's what I could do.
Wow. This is interesting after the fact.
Well, because
I mean, Woodward and Bernstein are out there yapping about, Watergate.
They are. They have different personalities than I do.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool. So, tell me about the two kids he raised, who, when all of this happened, were two adults who loved him very much.
Right.
They sat through that trial.
They both testified, yeah.
They testified at the trial. And they still thought their father was innocent?
Michael, his son, who lives in Boston, testified that Bob was his hero. And he kind of described all those things we already talked about in terms of Bob as a father and the way he raised them and that kind of thing. He didn't get into any of the details, of course, of the crime. He wasn't here when Autumn collapsed. Kimberly testified as well, and her testimony was more interesting in that she said on the stand that they already knew that that they were testing for cyanide because she said she had overheard nurses talking about it in the hospital when the test was ordered. But that was interesting because Kimberly was there when the detectives first interviewed Bob at his home, the very, very first time. And they're sitting on the couch and the detectives say, "Do you know how Autumn died?" And Bob said, "No, how?" And they said she died from cyanide poisoning. And I would think that if I had heard them say, "I'm going to order a cyanide test at the hospital," I would have said, "Oh my God, Dad, remember I told you they ordered the cyanide test?" And she never referenced that cyanide test that she claims to have heard happened ever before until the day that she testified at trial.
And that tells you what?
She was trying to explain away the Google searches.
Oh.
I don't think that it worked.
It didn't work.
No.
So can you imagine? So what we end up with then is the exact fear that Autumn had for her child, that the child would somehow end up without a sibling and without a father and without a mother has happened.
Right.
He killed his wife, orphaned his daughter, and had to create unbelievable havoc in the lives and the heads of his two adult children.
Right.
Where is he now?
He's at Houtsdale, which is the state prison in kind of rural central Pennsylvania. It's just past Altoona, I believe.
And did I read recently that there's there's still some legal stuff going on where he's trying to get out?
His appeals are pending with the state superior
The
court.
appeals on what basis?
The current level of appeal is challenging kind of the weight and sufficiency of the evidence at trial, arguing that Quest Diagnostics has another arm called the Nichols Institute, and there was a case involving the Department of Justice in which the Nichols Institute several years ago had changed test results or something to that effect that they ended up paying a large fine for.
They screwed up.
Right. And so the defense for Ferrante is now arguing that that should have been revealed to them prior to trial in discovery because that would have gone to the company's credibility when they were testifying about the cyanide results. But he's also working on a separate, and this wouldn't come up until later in the appeals process under newly discovered evidence, that the positive cyanide results were actually a false positive because Autumn was using creatine. And he is attempting to work with other people to create an experiment that would prove that.
Creatine being the thing she's taking to help with
the
her fertility.
That's right.
And is that, in terms of how the cyanide got into her body, the assumption is that he gave her creatine, only he put the cyanide in it.
That is the prosecution argued at trial that was the case, and that when she
came
had come
into the
home,
kitchen.
she had a drink.
Yeah.
He told his colleague that came to the hospital that night, she came in, she had a drink, and then she collapsed.
Right.
And so the theory by the prosecution was that he put it in the drink.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Oh, I had this thought. Dang it. Where'd it go? Where'd it go? Damn. Okay. How long did it take the jury?
They were out for a day and a half.
And the jury later reported after the trial, when they first went in to figure out if he was guilty or not, did they take a vote initially and what immediately after was the vote? It wasn't for conviction.
The very first vote had lots of people who were undecided. I think there were only three.
Three like me.
I think there were three who were guilty,
Right,
no
right,
question about it.
Right.
And then there were a couple who were not guilty, and then the rest were undecided.
Okay, so coming out of that's wow.
Yeah.
So in the course of those deliberations,
Yeah.
somehow the people who thought he was guilty managed to
Swing everybody to their side. Yeah. It took a long time, though.
What were you thinking they were going to come back with? You think it could be hung?
I did think it could be hung. I did not think there would be an outright acquittal at any point, but I did think that they could have hung.
Meaning that they couldn't reach, you have to have a unanimous verdict, and they couldn't reach it.
Right.
I mentioned Pellegrini, Lisa Pellegrini, the assistant AD. She seems like a real piece of work. And during the trial, she ends up in the paper. I remember, did you write that story too, or was that somebody else writing the story?
I think it was somebody else.
This was so bizarre. So the DA, who's going after this guy, Ferrante, the killer, ends up in a criminal kind of situation herself as a victim.
Yes.
No?
Yes.
The story was her boyfriend or something,
Nothing.
assaulted her,
Yes.
beat her up or something. And this got in, whoa. So I'm just saying, Lisa Pellegrini, this is an interesting character.
She's a very good prosecutor.
Smart as a whip.
Yeah.
And determined.
Oh, yeah.
She had not one scintilla of a doubt.
No.
She knew. She's with me.
She is with you, for sure. She's with you, for sure.
By virtue, though, of working in the DA's office, do you think people work in the DA's office are always thinking guilty, or not?
I don't think that, actually.
Yeah.
Because there's
Okay.
a lot of times when they will reduce charges or, work out a plea that are not, the most hardcore case that they could get.
Okay.
Yeah.
Guys, even though you know the outcome, I started reading it and I thought, well, I know how this ends. The killer got caught and blah, 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 blah. And I read all the articles that Paula was putting out while the case went on. This is, again, wow. As it says right here, riveting. As my good friend Jean Marie Lasca says, meticulously reported.
I was pleased with that, yeah.
Oh, yeah, because
She's very good.
she'd be the best.
Yeah.
And interesting, because Jean Marie says at the end, I won't soon forget Dr. Autumn Klein. And that's not, isn't that interesting?
Uh-huh.
Because to me, she was, God, it's awful. Almost peripheral, and the story becomes him.
Yeah, and it's interesting that that's the perspective you came at it with, because I came at it from kind of the opposite side. I wanted to know about both, and it was certainly more difficult gathering information about Bob for the book than it was about Autumn. The reporting was much more difficult.
Because
He had been convicted, and who wants to talk about their friend who got convicted of killing his wife?
right.
Right.
Just saying. So this is Paula Reed Ward, and as we've said, her job is the courts, which means you sit through a lot of fascinating kinds of things, see into people's lives in detail and intimate detail.
It makes me make my house be clean every morning before I leave for work.
Oh, God.
Because what if something happens and they come in and your house is messy like I see in all these crime scenes?
Are you
photos?
kidding me?
I'm not.
Because that's like the classic thing where your mother would say,
Right,
you make sure your underwear,
right.
you're not going to wear that horrible bra, are you? Because what if you end up in the hospital?
I have seen so many crime scene photos where the house is a disaster.
Oh,
And as I'm running out of the house in the morning, I'm like, oh my God, like if they come in, our dishes are dirty, the kids' toys are everywhere. And I try to straighten up as quick as I can so that they don't. I mean, I hope that nothing ever happens at my house. But were anyone to come in, I want them to not think we're slobs.
Oh, that is so funny.
Well,
And I have to tell you, I did end up in the hospital.
in your shabby
ER.
bra.
And I had these horrible, it was like, my underwear was, I had to do a wash. And by the end of that, I'm sticking things on me that, I wouldn't want anyone to see. And yeah, they had to cut my clothes off me, right? And I thought, oh, God, oh, how embarrassing. I was in agony. I was in such pain, and they'd already sedated me, and I was like, oh, the humiliation. So it's true.
See?
Okay, what I'm trying to get at, though, is because this is the last laugh we're going to have. You covered a story just last week, right?
Mm-hmm.
That I was surprised didn't get sort of, it is the most horrific story. It was another murder, the murder of two little boys by their mother. And that case ended how? Third-degree murder?
Because guilty of third-degree murder, but mentally ill. She had diminished capacity, the judge found, which automatically reduces first-degree premeditation because you can't form the intent because of the mental illness.
Okay, well, you tell me, though. Here's another white people, educated people, huh?
Mm-hmm.
White, educated people.
Yeah.
The father of the dead kids is a CPA or attorney.
CPA.
The mother, college graduate, blah, 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 blah. I'm just wondering if the judicial system is more inclined to see mental illness and diminished capacity in a suburban white mother as opposed to some black man from the hill.
I don't think so. And I have seen a lot of things in the system that I can criticize. But I also have covered a horrific homicide where a woman cut the baby out of another woman to take it.
Yes, I know that one too.
And that woman was a black woman. She was
And she
not
was
well-to-do,
found-
and she was also found guilty but mentally ill. So I don't think that that's a fair criticism.
Okay. But this case, explain to me, because I couldn't even read about it.
Right.
This is the case where a woman had 3 children, 3 boys, stay-at-home mom, again, a very controlling husband.
Keep going.
Very controlling husband, and made even more controlling by the fact that he'd gone totally off the rails with his crazed Christianity, okay? He impregnated her 7 times in 6 years. I mean,
6 times in 7 years.
Okay, 6 times in
Sorry.
7 years, anyway. And she's like, ugh. So, all I can say is, she's so overwhelmed that when her 2 youngest are like 2 and 3, she hog ties them. sticks them under puts them next to the wheels, the rear wheels of the minivan, and backs over her boys. Gets out of the minivan and checks to see if they're dead. They aren't. She gets back in and backs over them again and again and again. Didn't kill him. Hurt him. Obviously, they end up in the hospital. How the hell? They survive. How the hell are those children not taken from her? How the hell does that happen? Did the authorities not know she ran over her own boys and attempted to kill them?
She said that it was an accident.
How? Yes.
So the way that it happened, she untied them. They were 5 and 2 at the time.
Okay, fine. Oh,
she untied them, threw the twine away that she had used to tie them up. Her father got home. She told her father it was an accident. And they went to the hospital. They told the hospital it was an accident. They are, as you described, well-to-do white people from the northern suburbs. At the hospital, the nurse in the emergency room was called Childline, as you're supposed to do, to report this to CYF, that there's potential abuse. And for some reason, the nursing director canceled the Childline and said it was an accident. Nobody knows why. He testified at trial, but there was no explanation of any kind. And the police, I guess, believed that it was an accident.
How is it an accident when I'm sure they could tell the kids were not run over once, not run over twice, but run over 3 or 4? How the hell is that an accident?
I don't know.
And nobody is responsible for this. She gets the kids back, and they're dead a year later because she sat on them in the bathtub. I think the murderers here are all the people who are supposed to protect children from a crazy person. The whole system failed.
Yes.
I'd like to read more about what CYF says about that and what the damn nursing supervisor. What?
Right.
I'm sorry. I mean,
It is I think, probably the most horrific case I've ever covered.
And her husband and her father, they're not complicit? They knew. They left her alone with them.
The district attorney's office, when I asked why they didn't charge the father, said that they didn't think that they could prove a case against him. And the charges would have been something like endangering the welfare or obstruction. But the prosecutor's office said that they didn't think that they could make the case.
Okay, so what happens to her now?
She will be sentenced in June, I think it is.
But because she's mentally ill, she'll go to some facility.
She's still going to go to real prison.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So under Pennsylvania law, guilty but mentally ill means you go to prison, but you are entitled to psychiatric services in the prison system. And, typically third-degree murder calls for 20 to 40 years. Because there's 2 victims, there's a chance they could stack those on top of each other.
So odds are she ain't getting out.
Probably not.
And the father, there's still a surviving kid.
And he has him.
Oh, God. I just want to say, the father, I can't stand this man. I don't know him. Wouldn't know him if I saw him. My sense from all the stories I read, just despicable person. I could no more do this woman's job. It's why I do what I do and why you do. We're both constitutionally prepared to do what. Yeah,
we are.
So I highly recommend Paula Reed Ward's Death by Cyanide. I mean, I really do. Even having heard, believe me, you haven't heard the examination, the sexist crap that different, whatever his name is, subjected that poor old woman from Quest to really pissed me off. Well, you can read about it, but I'm not going to. Jeez. And this is a great way to end. Roger writes, nice change of pace today, but kind of sad that murder is better than talking about the Orange Nightmare. Yes, that's the state we've come to. We take refuge in murder. It's so much better than looking at the horror that's going on in our nation's capital. Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
It was really nice meeting you.
You too.
Okay. So, guys, we made it through another week. Yee-haw! And, I don't know, get through your weekend and don't watch too much TV. Don't watch the news. Give yourself a break. It's going to be warmer. Get out. Smell the spring air. Okay? And I'll see you Monday. God knows what Monday will bring. I'll see you Monday.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.